Hi everybody, you're very welcome back to Law Hero. My name is Jen and I make videos about the law. And I haven't been on YouTube for a while. I've been exploring TikTok quite a bit. I've also been giving lots of FE1 talks, and that's when my voice is nearly gone. The FE1s are in 2 weeks time, so that has been my be all and end all. Also it's middle ground season, so people are getting their CVs and cover letters prepared, so that has been, you know, quite taxing for me in terms of time, and I haven't really been able to give the time to YouTube. That being said, I've been away on holiday 2 weeks ago and I read like 10 books, but the one that really stood out on holidays was David and Goliath, or Goliath, probably Goliath, by Malcolm Gladwell. I'm a massive Malcolm Gladwell fan. I've read Blink, what's the other one over there he's written? Can't remember, but I really like him. I think I've done other YouTube videos on his work. And today we're talking about David and Goliath because not only do I need some inspiration around being an underdog, but I'm sure a lot of you do as well. And that's exactly what the book is about, David and Goliath. It's an underdog story, and yeah, we're just going to get right into it. I've taken 3 lessons away from it, and yeah, once again, if you need any type of law profession related advice or stuff like that, you can always contact me on my social medias. But yeah, let's get right into it. So quite simply, in the book, Gladwell draws on historic events and the psychology of successful human beings to illustrate how underdogs have advantages. And if you know the story of David and Goliath, you know that Goliath was this big giant that was used by an army. I don't have the historical references. They would basically wheel this lad out and he would be like their man. He would kill everybody. David was just a shepherd. He put himself forward to fight Goliath, much to everybody's confusion. They're like, why would you go up against a giant when you were just a small shepherd? And he's like, no, I have rescued sheep from bears with using my bare hands, and I have rescued them and brought them back, and I have a lot of strength that none of you really see. And everybody's like, nah, this guy, he's not gonna win. Little did they know that David was a skilled slingshotter, and apparently back in the day, if you were a slingshotter, you were like the most formidable person in the army because of the precision with which you could strike, usually to the head, and kill somebody because of the pressure the stone and the speed would cause and shatter your whatever skull, I guess. And in the book he talks about how the Irish slingshotters were actually the most accurate, and I was like, yes, go the Irish. But yeah, it was kind of like everybody knew about the slingshotters, but nobody knew that David the shepherd was a slingshotter as well. So it was from that point of view, Malcolm Gladwell points out that it was an uneven match. He also points out that David actually ran at Goliath, and it's something Goliath said when David was running towards him that make historians think that Goliath wasn't all there. So there's a phenomenon that when you are a giant, that because your growth is like, it causes hormonal imbalance, it actually caused a tumor in his brain that made it hard for him to see, because he says something to David which is, why do you come at me with sticks? Am I a dog? Or something like this. And basically David only had 1 stick, so the fact that he said plural means that he may have had double vision, which makes sense because any of the giants that have been examined in history have had these issues with their brain. So the more we peel back the story, the more we realize it was an uneven match, and the more we realize that a lot of the time we judge by appearances rather than drilling down to the advantages that people actually have. And that is how he frames his book, and from then he talks about all the different times through history and with successful human beings that this David and Goliath paradox has become. So the first lesson from the book is that living in a privileged environment might hinder your success. And he gives the example of this Californian billionaire who's really worried about bringing up his children because the billionaire says that it was the struggle and the adversity that made him who he was. And the whole point is that of elasticity, because if you have a safety net your whole life, you're less likely to go out and make risky decisions or try hard, because if you know that there's always a backstop to your decisions, you're not going to be as ballsy about making your decisions, and you're probably not going to stretch yourself because there's no need. Human beings, we're very good at conserving energy and making shortcuts. Sorry, Outliers was the other book by Malcolm Gladwell, and I think I made a YouTube video about that. But we're very good at taking shortcuts and conserving energy, and we get to where we want to go trying to use the least possible energy. But when you have no options and survival then becomes the goal, you stretch yourself inadvertently and you grow. You don't grow in your comfort zone, and having a backstop creates comfort. So the lesson is that being less privileged in any area creates this underdog mentality, and that creates that resilience that wouldn't otherwise come had you had always those resources that are there if you fall. Because if you think about it, what is stress? Stress is a lack of resources like time, money, and all those comforts you get from living a life of privilege. And to become in a state of distress means you're actually growing. It may be uncomfortable, but you're actually growing. Obviously, sustained distress over time can cause, decaying in humans. But, if you go through a certain amount of stress and then you get to reap the reward, that has a massive impact on your confidence. It has a massive impact on your longevity and your resilience, because you can get through bad patches on your own without other people helping you. That being said, we all need support, but I think the point he's trying to make is that a safety net can sometimes serve as a bad thing or be counterintuitive. So the next area Gladwell talks about is if you have a learning disability, it might actually give you an advantage. And this is in the same vein as coming from not a wealthy background and having that chip on your shoulder and wanting to overcome so that you can get to the top. It's the exact same with people who have disabilities. And he says that people who have a disadvantage like a learning disability, they can often overcompensate or overdevelop their skills in other areas, which makes up for it. So I think if you take a look at a lot of the self-improvement gurus, or even myself, I would be remiss if I didn't put myself in that category. A lot of the time, people who are overcompensating are doing so because they have a lack in some area of their life. I can say that for sure with myself. I had a lack of confidence and a lack of self-belief, and through pushing myself to do this YouTube channel, start my own business and become a lawyer, I have, you would probably argue that I overcompensated. And now I've become quite resilient to the point where confidence is there. It's not that I don't have to work on it, but it definitely came from a place of lack. And I wonder how would I have turned out if I was always confident. The same goes for people, the author argues, that have dyslexia. People who have dyslexia actually have a part of their brain that doesn't allow them to chronologically, for example, look at words on a page. They have to actually look at the structure of the word. It takes them far longer to process words. I'm in a family who have a few people with dyslexia, and when I actually read this book, I felt far more empathy for them and what dyslexia actually does and how it slows down reading. I never really understood that. A lot of the time people think dyslexia is, oh, you just jumble up words or whatnot, but actually reading is very, very difficult for people with dyslexia, and writing some of the time, and I just didn't know that. The point the author is trying to make is that because of this learning disability, what you learn to do is become very adaptable as someone with dyslexia, and you learn to see things outside the box. You become aware. And my other half was actually telling me that he was doing negotiation when he was in college, and that other people would, you know, drill down and start to follow the instructions that the lecturer gave for the task, but he was very, you know, quickly able to see that somebody had written their whole solution. I think it was out in a map, and he was just like, okay, I'll sit down beside you in your map, and basically I've seen your whole solution. So that gave him more time to think of a counter argument. That kind of thing, that kind of out of the box thinking is not natural to people who are used to following instruction because they don't have a disability. So I found that very interesting. A lot of the time, I think he mentioned the CEO of JP Morgan has dyslexia. Interesting thing though, when these people were asked, they said they wouldn't wish it on their children. So take of that what you will. The final lesson, and this is the most important lesson in the book, is that you use your own unique skill set to beat the big competitors on your own terms. And I've been trying to implement this in my business, in my sport life. And the reason is because if you don't know yourself well, and if you don't know your strengths, you will be led and said by other people's strategy. For example, if you're playing football and there's a more dominant team, because of their strategy and because their adherence and their knowledge of their advantages, you will be led and said by them, and you will not stick to your own plan because you're constantly reacting. And he gives the example, or sorry, I've seen another example of like the Spartans. They were able to conquer the Persians even though there was only 300 of them apparently. Gladwell says in the book that if an underdog army uses guerrilla tactics in battle, it wins 63% of the time. If it doesn't and it tries to fight fire with fire, it only wins 29% of the time. And he gave lots of examples of big world superpowers going into smaller countries and the guerrilla tactics working very well. Indeed, in Ireland, guerrilla warfare was one of the strategies used against the Black and Tans by the native Irish, and they used their knowledge of local roads, local weak points in order to sabotage the English army in Ireland. And it means that if you're the underdog, you shouldn't fight fire with fire. You should focus on how you can outsmart, just like David did with Goliath. And you will see, for example, in the book, he gives the example of during the Troubles in the North, the women walking down the street towards the British Army. They didn't know what to do because they didn't want to be seen to be firing on the British or on the Belfast women who, you know, had been in curfew and they couldn't go out and get food in the evening time, and they had to feed their children. It was a very good move to put all the women out in the street with the children, and you know, it would have looked very bad worldwide for the British Army to be seen attacking them. The other great example is the picture of the dog, Alsatian dog in Montgomery, launching at a young black man. Now you can see from the picture, and I'll actually put it up here, that the young boy is leaning back and the dog is leaning in. But actually, when Malcolm Gladwell dissected the picture and found out more information about the picture, which was pivotal for the civil rights movement, they found that the policeman isn't actually launching the dog at the boy, and the dog hasn't really like viciously attacked the boy. It just looks like that because of the boy's body language. He actually wasn't even part of the march. He was just a bystander, and you can see that the police officer is actually restraining the dog, has him on a tight leash, but we don't see any of that. We just think of the racial implication of the picture, which is white police officer with an Alsatian dog attacking a young black bystander, and that's enough for the world press to go into a flurry, and it was enough to give the civil rights movement more fuel that they needed. It's just that they were clever enough to know that this image would conjure up enough support for them, even though factually it wasn't the truth, as in this young person wasn't part of the movement, he just happened to be in the vicinity and black. And there's really interesting stories of in the book of how, you know, Martin Luther King and his associates were able to outsmart one of the most notorious racist white police officer, Bull O'Connor, in Montgomery. I found that so interesting, how they were able to get around that, even though the odds were stacked against them. There's other examples in the book, for example, during the Nazi occupation of France during the Vichy 1940, of how, because Switzerland was neutral, they were able to get a lot of Jewish children up the mountains and out of harm's way, and it was all done under the nose of the Nazis. But there were certain, you could say, acts of faith that worked in favour of these Huguenots who were looking after Jewish children in the mountains. There were certain blind eyes turned to what they were doing, and the fact is that it was, again, local knowledge. It was thinking on your feet and not thinking like the enemy. And I think that's exactly the message I got from the book. That's what ups your chance of winning. It's looking inwards and knowing yourself. Like Socrates says, know thyself. That is how you win a battle. You win it on your terms. On that note, I'll stop jibber jabbering. I hope you enjoyed my synopsis of the book, and I hope that if you're an underdog, you play to your strengths.